Star Wars, the original one, Episode 4, A New Hope, is a classic film that launched a major franchise, so naturally it has a lot of tie-in media and adaptions. For today's video, I figured I would look back at all of those adaptions, from a novel perspective at least. The original adaptation of Star Wars was not called Star Wars or even Star Wars A New Hope, rather it was called From the Adventures of Luke Skywalker. The book dropped 7 months before Star Wars came to theaters and was adapted by Alan Dean Foster, though the book is credited to George Lucas on the cover, and originally rocked a cover by Ralph McQuarrie. Alan Dean Foster has been in the industry for decades, writing a myriad of original books along with some Star Wars material. In addition to this adaptation, he also wrote Splinters of the Mind's Eye, which was being thrown around briefly as a possible sequel film to The Empire Strikes Back, the cheaper alternative. Later, he would write The Approaching Storm, which took place during the Clone Wars, and finally, most recently, he adapted The Force Awakens, adding into the nostalgia sequel aspects of that film. Okay, he also wrote an outline for Star Trek the Motion Picture, a handful of Star Trek novels. He wrote novels for the original Alien trilogy, the book for Dark Star, The Thing, Clash of the Titans, The Last Starfighter, Transformers, and that's really just the tip of the iceberg. Basically, this was the movie novelization guy. This was a thing before Star Wars and long after. Ballantine Books put out this book, and it was their only fictional novel in Star Wars, mostly doing guidebooks and the like based on the universe later on, but still having a working relationship with them for a while after this. Do we really need to go over the story of Star Wars again? Okay, just quick. Luke Skywalker is a farm boy who dreams of bigger and better things when his new droids R2 and C-3PO arrive and show him a message from Leia, the Princess of Alderaan. Luke meets up with Ben Kenobi, who reveals to Luke the truth about the Jedi, and the duo head off to save the princess, following the deaths of Luke's aunt and uncle. Luke and Obi-Wan meet Han Solo and Chewbacca, who they hire to fly them to Alderaan, but the planet's gone. The group, in its place, finds the Death Star, which pulls them in with a tractor beam. They steal some stormtrooper gear and save the princess. Obi-Wan Kenobi dies at the hands of the evil Darth Vader. They blow up the Death Star with the X-Wing strike team, and everyone celebrates a job well done. This book being released months before the original film leads to it having several continuity issues despite being otherwise a good adaptation of the film. Easy examples to spot off the top of my head were Red Squadron being designated Blue Squadron in the book, the text that replaced the title crawl saying another galaxy, another time, rather than a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Stormtroopers falling from the ceiling of the Tantum IV rather than busting through the front door like they did in the movie. Luke's land speeder has a canopy. Jabba is said to be a bipedal creature rather than a giant slug. The book opens on a recap of the Star Wars prequels, which is surprisingly accurate for back in the day, like before those movies were ever written, though it says things that were hard retconned later, implying things like Palpatine being a puppet of the Imperial Shadow Government, something that obviously never happened. This book has some deleted scenes added back, some stuff with Biggs on Tatooine, and Jabba's confrontation as Solo, though as we know that was added back later in the special editions. It's the same general ideas as the film, but far more in depth. Also, this novel very specifically goes out to say the Force is very mythical and undefinable, though of course the prequels added midichlorians and stuff. That was kind of implied in the original movie though. Overall, this novel was a pretty solid adaptation that was seemingly written about a film that was about 75% complete, and with Alan Dean Foster making a ton of assumptions about the world of Star Wars, following some talks with Lucas. Some of his guesses guessed the future of the franchise with almost Nostradamus levels of accuracy. Other moments that he guessed about were less accurate. I think the pros on this one work well, and to this day, this is the version the Star Wars franchise most often reprints and runs with of all these adaptions. Classic Star Wars was the second adaptation and the first junior novel adaptation of the story, which would pretty quickly be outshined. The book came out 18 years after the film's original run, dropping in May 1995 and being written by Larry Weinberg, who is some kind of lawyer from what I gathered from the back of the book. The junior novel was abridged. I mean, like, so abridged that the book can be read in probably 45 minutes. This book falls somewhere between a novelization and overly long plot summary told from memory. For one, half the characters aren't even named. For example, Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen are just called Luke's beloved aunt and uncle, and this is on multiple occasions they're called that. I can say I like the cover of this book. It looks pretty nice, but honestly it's so short, almost too short. But if you want probably the fastest way to power through this film with a startling amount of good ground covered, but almost all of the magic wrung through the cracks of the abridged storytelling, this is probably the way to do it. Following classic Star Wars, the next angle that was tackled by the Star Wars team was a journal series. Basically, these are 3 short novels based around the original Star Wars films, featuring a novel about Luke, Leia, and Han. Alright, first is Star Wars Journal, The Flight for Justice, which was written by John Peel. John Peel worked on a bunch of novels for Doctor Who, Star Trek, James Bond Jr., and Carmen Sandiego, but despite everything, this is actually the only time he worked in the Star Wars universe. This book was your standard Star Wars story. You know, we said the plot at the start, but the gimmick is that it's basically told from Luke Skywalker's diary. It adds some context and some internal thoughts we didn't get to see between the scenes, more context for what Luke was thinking on Tatooine about Imperials and stuff like that. Luke had a friend, Windy, which is a reference to Luke's name in an early adaptation of the Star Wars film Mace Windu, and this would also be before Mace Windu was invented, so it's kind of interesting. Luke really wanted to become an Imperial in this book, which was kind of funny. Bro was in the galactic alt-right pipeline, I guess. Luke talks a bit about legends he heard of the Jedi, like how they were given sabers day one, for example, and other stuff based on echoes and stories of the now dead Order. One thing during the OT we will talk about often going through these books is the different ways Luke handles the sister kiss and stuff with Leia. This book opts for him to ignore Return of the Jedi and just be really into Leia romantically, which I suppose from a story perspective kind of makes sense. That's what the film implies, but I don't know. If it was me, I would throw in a line about like it feeling wrong or platonic or something. Revisionist history for sure, but that would probably lessen the strange incesty stuff. Jude Watson wrote adventure journal Captive to Evil. We love Jude Watson on this channel. You guys would know that if you watch my giant Star Wars playlist. Check that out. But this is Leia's version and tells more about the events preceding the events of Star Wars. Of course, that includes the capture of the Death Star plans, which more or less happens by happenstance, and something about a dude wanting to smash Leia and a rebel getting imprinted on with the plans. I like Leia, and she was well written. Some of the extended scenes and stuff pull it into being at least kind of interesting. There's a chapter following Leia talking to Han, who's trying to leave before the Yavin 4 celebration after the Death Star's destruction, and I thought it was kind of cute and shows their progression from the bickering rivals we saw on the Death Star to married later on. This is a solid novel, and it's interesting. This book, more than the other 2 journals, feel more like a companion side novel than a full-fledged adaptation. Star Wars Journal, Hero for Hire, follows Han Solo and was written by Donna Tusher and follows Han Solo. This seemingly being the only thing Donna Tusher ever written, which was sad because it's actually pretty good. And I'm guessing this is some kind of pen name because she literally has no credits on anything else from all the research I did online. The book takes place during Han's captivity during Return of the Jedi, and we see Han talking with Saida, a Bomar monk who lives in Jabba's palace, wanting to learn about galactic heroes and interested in Han's journey from a scoundrel to a rebel hero, while Han worries about Leia, who's currently being held captive following her rescue of him. I like that this shows Han attempting to overcome his carbonite blindness. It also retells Han's portion of A New Hope from Han's perspective and does a pretty amazing job of it. The setup of this, not just being a journal, but being written from the perspective of an interview, is pretty interesting. The book is not told entirely linearly either, and Han, who just woke up from his carbonite, is confused, gets off topic, asks about how Leia's doing, and goes on asides. It almost feels like a play or something, and it's an interesting and creative wraparound for this concept. And Han's rapport with both Saida and Chewbacca, who are the only characters he talks to in the present tense, are pretty interesting. This is far and away the most interesting of the journal series in my opinion, though it's not exactly the best adaptation of A New Hope given the strange structure. 2004 saw Ryder Windham create a new junior novelization of the film Star Wars. Ryder Windham, who was a consistent writer of Star Wars at this time, writing journal novels on the whole original trilogy, a Darth Vader biography, source books, working up till a few years ago, and presumably someone who may come back. He pops up here and there, takes brief breaks, and manages to squeeze back into the Star Wars universe. The book is mainly a one-for-one adaptation of the film, though it interjects some prequel and EU lore. For example, Owen reflects that it is a coincidence that C-3PO looks like Anakin's old droid, but doesn't specifically think it is C-3PO, Anakin's old droid. Vader sees Tatooine and thinks about his mother. This is the book to read if you're a big continuity person and want a pretty straight-up adaptation of A New Hope. If you're a big continuity person, though, some things in the 2004 version are out of date and no longer considered canon, but you're in luck because in 2017 the book was edited for the modern continuity by Emile Fortune, though it is lightly changed and is mostly just a small re-release to pull it back into canon and not have to rewrite an entire book. Dialogue is pulled from the final film with some internal monologues to smooth out some of those prequel-era plot holes. The action is clean and it's a nice 2-3 hour read, if that. I liked this, but this is also so similar to the final film that I would probably just recommend watching the final film. An interesting project followed the 2004 junior novel with Ian Dosher's book William Shakespeare's Star Wars, Verily A New Hope, a book that attempted to adapt Star Wars to the style of William Shakespeare, using old-time language interjected with Star Wars phrases, and of course the story of the original film, along with using the rhythmic stylings of Shakespeare and iambic pentameter. It was written in a style of a play, with some stage instructions and some set directions written into the story. This is certainly an interesting idea for a book, and since this dropped in 2013, Ian Dosher has more or less made a living off of writing these. Well, among other things, but he did all 9 Skywalker saga films, one on the Back to the Future films, Mean Girls, Clueless, Deadpool, The Avengers, Frankenstein, Dracula, Jekyll and Hyde, and something on Donald Trump's presidency. This is certainly a fun gimmick book, and someone must really enjoy these since they put out a lot of them. I feel a class of high schoolers could probably put this on as a really fun play, which I think might be a cool way to see it. But beyond that, I don't really see what the point is. It is interesting and well done, and the audiobook even has some musical numbers in it if you're interested in that. It also follows the story and doesn't really take creative liberties beyond the dialogue. It still has spaceships, lightsabers, and blasters. Part of me thinks it may have been fun to just write it as a non-canon story taking place in Shakespeare's time, and I think the hardest thing to adapt would be the ships and the Death Star. There'd be some stuff you'd need to change. Alright, so the next version, A New Hope, The Princess, the Scoundrel, and the Farm Boy. The author, Alexandra Bracken, tells the story of the original film from the perspectives of Leia, Han, and Luke. each taking an act and putting it together to create the film from a new perspective and told in the first person like I, Jedi was. This is a pretty rare phenomenon for Star Wars books. This is kind of like the original journal series, but rather than being told from the past tense, it's told as it's happening and unfolding. Basically, it's told like the film would be, but just from these changing perspectives. I will briefly touch on the story since the framing device allows for a second-person POV of our three primary characters, Leia, Han, and Luke, or the princess, the scoundrel, and the farm boy. The story goes as expected mostly, but some internal monologuing helps explain continuity blunders created by Star Wars. It also features new scenes in lieu of old ones. Leia's story, for example, fills in the gap of time after her capture leading to the destruction of Alderaan, with the story not really covering Luke's meeting of Obi-Wan. Han's story covers him meeting Luke and Obi-Wan, with a lot more lead-in to the moments before Han meets the duo, with Greedo and all that stuff, and more internal monologuing about the life of a conflicted scoundrel. Luke's story picks up during the Death Star escape, with Luke reflecting on the grief of losing his family and now mentor Obi-Wan so early into his Jedi training, with Leia explaining her grief on losing Alderaan, along with some added scenes of the Yavin base when Luke tries out for Red Squadron and proves he's an effective pilot, and that they didn't just throw this random kid in an X-Wing because he said he could do it. All this, of course, leading to the end of the story as we pretty much remember it, weaving in much of the film's actual dialogue into the conversations of the book. The book has some extra scenes among the main beats of the film, one of my favorites being Leia's torture at the hands of Darth Vader on the Death Star, which we see fairly in depth. Luke's brief tests on an X-Wing simulator before taking off to the Death Star was also pretty fun and gives us more Wedge Antilles, which unfortunately he became more of a character during the EU. Like, he doesn't have a lot going on in the original films. I think this book benefits a lot from hindsight, like Ryder Wyndham's more straightforward adaptation, and allows the book to iron out some plot holes. The book, well, much different, is really good, and I think it proves that Star Wars or A New Hope is great, even told from a different perspective. Well, that was a brief overview of every Star Wars A New Hope novelization or slight reimagining I already listened to from a certain point of view, and while I considered putting that book into this video, the fact that it's 40 connected but slightly removed stories from A New Hope taking place in or around the film made it so I didn't really feel like it fit in with the thesis of this video. But here's my general breakdown of what we covered. If you're interested in the genesis of Star Wars and its early versions, you probably want to check out From the Adventures of Luke Skywalker. The best straight-up adaptation is Ryder Wyndham's version. I think the more easy version to track down is the 2004 version, which more or less works with canon, but the 2017 adaptation made a few changes to fit in with modern canon. Either are adequate. I don't think many people would be all that confused either way unless you're really, really, really hard into the lore. The journal series Hero for Hire has an interesting perspective, and I thought that was a really strong way to experience the story for Han Solo stans like me. The other two journals are okay. The William Shakespeare adaptation is a fun gimmick if you like both Star Wars and Shakespeare, and is at least an interesting experiment. Classic Star Wars was hot trash and was totally outclassed by Ryder Wyndham's adaptation a few years later. Finally, The Princess, Scoundrel, and the Farm Boy expands the perspectives of our three leads while also remaining within the modern canon, something that Journal series notably doesn't, and it feels different enough from the Journal series that I didn't feel it was too repetitive. I think you have a lot of options if you want to read an adaptation of this film. I think a few of these helped me see the original Star Wars from a new perspective, which I really respected and enjoyed. Well, anyways, that was a bit different, but hopefully this looser format was still satisfying. Give me some slack. I was trying to juggle like the 8 novels that I read for this video.